Hey, what's up? My name is Galactor, and in this video I want to explain you a method of gluing different kick layers together so that you go from this to this. But before I do that, I want to thank each and every one of you for the support that I'm getting lately on the channel. I'm building this community to help other producers in their journey so that they don't have to go through the same struggles as I did. And it means so much to me to see that I'm actually helping people out there, even if it's just a tiny bit, but I'm hoping to grow the channel more and more so that we can all benefit from each other's knowledge. One way I want to achieve that is to do a community remake. I will soon upload a video about that and on how it's going to work, etc. But I think this will be a great way to learn something all together and to become better producers. Now, to get back to the video, I will just explain you how you can bring all of these different elements together and mix them so that it sounds like a nice cohesive kick. That means I'm not going to go through the creation of these layers because I think there are already a ton of really good tutorials out there that explain you how to create those layers. And for this project, I just used the good old EQ distort, EQ distort, EQ distort method. It is something that's very common. I think all of you have seen it before. But if you really want me to show you how I did this, just let me know in the comments and I will still do a video about that. So as you've heard in the beginning, all the elements together without any processing or mixing, it sounds like this. You can hear that there are some good layers, but it just sounds so dry. It's lacking power and it doesn't make you want to punch the air with the bass face. And in order to do that, I just put all the sounds on a separate mixer channel and then routed them through a mix bus. And this is where most of the magic is going to happen. So before I'm going to dive into the processing and the mixing that I did on the kick bus, I want to show you what each individual element sounds like and also explain you why I added it to this kick. So the first punch sounds like this. And it just has a low cut on the EQ to make sure it's not clashing with the third punch, and later on I'll explain you why. And it just adds a little bit of a punchiness and some nice body in the high end. Then the second punch is the one that cuts through most. This is the main punch that you hear. As some processing, I added a reverb to have a nice reverb tail. And I like to automate the mix level over here instead of the wet level inside the plugin. Because if I'm automating this one, I can still tweak this parameter and everything inside here, and I don't have to do it any other way. I think this is, for me, is just the most convenient way of doing it. And the next thing is an EQ. Again, a low cut to make sure it's not clashing with the other punch. And I boosted some of the fundamental frequencies of the kick. And it brings out the resonance a little bit more, makes it cut through a little bit better. Also with the dip right in front of it, it just makes sure that these frequencies stand out a lot. If I turn these off, the kick sounds, the punch sounds like this. And with. So it adds a lot more resonance and it's just cutting through a little bit more, and that's what I was looking for. Next thing is a patcher to boost overall volume, and a limiter to make sure it's not clipping. And then the last kick is like a distorted club kick. And all I did here was reducing the highs a little bit and boosting some of the lows. And altogether the punches sound like this. And then next up we have two tails and two crunches. The first one sounds like this. And this is actually a tail that I got after creating this punch over here. And it just adds a very nice crunchy sound in the high end. And I'm just bringing it in this second part of the tail basically, so that it has a little bit more movement. Otherwise, if I let it start here, it was too static. And putting over here, it just adds a little bit more movement. Then the second tail sounds like this. And this has a dynamic high shelf to reduce the highs a little bit, because otherwise it was clashing too much with the first tail. Then we have a first crunch, sound like this. very high, and it's just a part of this tail reversed and a nice fade in, and this just makes sure that it has a little sweep in the end, so the kick itself flows nice. And then the last crunch sounds like this, and it just adds a little bit of a character on the offbeat section, so you get like a tiny bit of a reverse bass feel. So that's the kick with their individual processing. So then let's have a look what is going on the kick bus. And the first thing we see is an equalizer. And what I pretty much always do is creating a low cut, and never really higher than that. Most of the times I go lower. And this one is just on the sides. So what you basically do with that is you basically cancel all the bass information on the sides in your stereo image. And I often find that this gives you a little bit of a cleaner kick. It's a little bit more smooth. It might not be so noticeable, especially if your sound system is not so good, but if you have proper headphones, you will hear the difference. And then the other thing I did was creating a few EQ points. This one again is boosting the fundamental frequency of the punch that I was talking about earlier. So it's cutting through a little bit more. And the others just reduce a few peak points that I found for this specific kick, and reducing those peaks make sure that this one is cutting out, or standing out a little bit more even. So if I turn all of these off, it sounds like this. And with, it's only a very slight difference, but it can be good to have a look at these details just to make your kick stand out a little bit more, make it a little bit more punchy, and add that character you're looking for. And then next up in the chain, we find a compressor. In this case, I used the glue by Centomic. And as the name says, it's very good at gluing things together. This is an emulation from an SSL style bus compressor. So these kind of compressors are very good to use at your buses, whether that's a kick bus or maybe a lead bus, etc. These compressors really can glue everything together and have the ability to make complete mixes sound bigger with more power, and it adds a lot more punch and drive to it. And I love using the preset drum full parallel high pass, but don't be fooled by the word high pass, because it's not an equalizer or something, so it's not actually high passing the complete signal. It's just high passing a little bit the compression effect, so the bass is not affected so much. And for some reason it makes everything stand out a little bit more on its own. So you hear the highs, you hear clearer, but the bass is also a little bit more crispy. And with this compressor turned on, it sounds like this. So as you can hear, it's a major difference, and for me it adds character to pretty much every kick that I make. Now these first two plugins you can basically find always on my kickbus channels. So there's always an EQ and always a compression in the beginning to glue everything a little bit together before further processing. But the next three plugins that you see here are somewhat optional. You know, they're not always there. It really depends on the end result that I'm going for. It really depends on what kind of kick I'm making, because these are the plugins that give most of the character and dynamics to the overall sound. So first up I chose the Saturn II by FabFilter to apply some saturation, and it's just a dynamic warmth transformer preset, and I think it's just best to have a listen what it does. So for me, for this kick, it just smooths out everything a little bit and makes everything a little bit more balanced. And then the next thing that I sometimes like to do is to add an OTT. And as producers, I think we're all familiar with the good old OTT. And honestly, it can be so powerful on a kick bus. What I usually like to do is to reduce the depth. In this case, I went with 17%. And then it's really just a matter of playing around with the lows, the mids, and the highs. See what works for your kick. So again, it really depends on your kick and what type of end result you want. what I can recommend you to do is, as soon as you're tweaking these knobs and you like the sound, save the preset in OTT, or maybe even render the kick as a whole, or just the tails, or just the punch, so that you can always come back to the sound that you like. And as I said, it's just play around with the parameters here and find a sweet spot for your kick. And let me show you what it did to this kick. And as you can hear, it made it so much more dynamic and fresh, and it really made everything much more powerful. And then next in the chain, we find the Inflator. Now, I've made shorts here on my YouTube channel before about this plugin, because I honestly think it's also really powerful on a kick bus. And it basically allows you to shape the volume of certain frequencies. So I created this shape, and then it's just a matter of playing around with the frequencies, the high cut and the low cut, until you find a sweet spot. You can play around with the amount. You even have a mid-side knob to make everything a little bit more mono if you want. You can smooth out everything. And let's have a listen to what it does to this kick. So it's not a major difference, but in this case it just adds a little bit more of a crunch in the high end, which I really liked. So then we already get to the last section of my mixer chain. What I like to do with these plugins is to bring out the volume and make some small adjustments and add some small details to really make the kick stand out. The first thing I used here is a patcher. Yeah, so it's a patcher preset, and it's an Inflator emulation from Frank Paul. It might be a bit extreme, but I really like the sound that it gives in the tail, like the crunchiness. This is without it. And with. I really like the sound that it gives when I apply it like this, but often I use it a little bit more subtle, just to bring out the overall volume and the power of the kick. Then the next thing I do is open up an Ozone 10, because it simply gives you a lot of options. You have a lot of effects that you can apply. And the first thing I did right now was an equalizer. For me, it lacked a little bit of low, so I added a small boost of it there. Then a small dip around the 200 Hertz, because I often find there's a lot of stuff going on and it's a little bit unwanted. And then if you make a little dip, it could be that your kick comes out a little bit more clean. So it's something you can try. Then I have a small boost just around the fundamentals of the punch again, and I've added a little bit more highs with the small boost over here. So again, it's very small details, but it can just finish up your kick a little bit. And then I added a maximizer, not so much to bring out the volume again, but it adds a little bit of a transient emphasis, and I've added some soft clipping. Without it sounds like this. And with. Now I really wanted like a very crunchy and distorted sounding kick, and just added just a little bit more of an emphasis on that, as well as on the punch. And sometimes it feels a little bit clipping, so I add a limiter in the end to make sure everything stays below the 0 dB. And then you have this kick. And what I then like to do is maybe turn off these plugins, see what it sounds like. So by doing that, you can find a lot of different versions of your kick and render them out, and I just save them in the same folder, so whenever I'm working on a project I can always go back and I have a ton of different kicks that I can choose from. And then the last thing that I sometimes like to do is make it a little bit more mono overall. So right now I have 30% stereo separation, where it's actually merged. Yeah, this is something that you have to watch out with, because you can lose some dynamics and some character and some details on the sides, so be careful with this knob, but sometimes it's nice to squish everything together so that you have more space on the sides for leads and screeches, etc. So that was it for this tutorial. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it somewhat useful and that you can apply some of these techniques in your own production process. If you like it, please hit like and subscribe button to help me grow the channel. And then I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.